Are we ready?
Yeah.
Well, I'm super excited to share with you a little astrology and medicine. Um, a little background for those who may not know me. um, I learned astrology, traditional astrology, through Bill, and wasn't very intentional about it. Just kind of happened. He's been studying astrology for about 50 years, and it's one of his main methodologies that he uses. And I just started asking questions, and all of a sudden I was like, oh shit, I'm reading charts, and oh, this is turning into something. And in May, then I went to the Northwest Astrological Conference in uh outside of Seattle, and it was 5 whole days of super intense astrology all day, like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And this is a product of that time. I went to a lot of medical astrology courses during that time, because since I've accumulated this knowledge of astrology, I'm like, okay, how am I going to use this? How am I going to incorporate it into my acupuncture practice? So I'm still entertaining the idea. I'm a Virgo rising, so I'm still very, very, very skeptical of it. And making this PowerPoint and this presentation was my own challenge of like, but do I believe it? Because I don't know if I believe it. But this is I I believe in what I'm going to share today, enough to share it. And I just find it interesting. And so let's go along and like look at some correlations of the planets and the signs and the houses, and I give actual like techniques and steps that you can look at someone's chart even if you don't know anything about astrology, and start to pick the pieces. So that's what is really helpful about traditional astrology, is there's like techniques and steps, whereas new age astrology is a lot about the associations and archetypes. I really appreciate the steps, and like, okay, you look at this, then that, and then this, and then that, and it kind of falls into place. This slide is just a little bit about the history of astrology, where it comes from, how it was composed. It dates back to the 2nd century BCE, and what that was during like the Alexander the Great conquering time, and have your own beliefs about what that time was like. But also it was a very like mixing pot of cultures and systems, and during that time is where a lot of astrology concepts were put together and documented. So that's when the documentation started to occur. Who knows how long? Yes.
When you say astrological systems, do you mean like the sort of like the Hellenistic
Yeah.
style?
Yes.
So astrology, kind of as we understand it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and especially Western astrology, Chinese astrology, or other forms of astrology.
Like Mesopotamian
Yeah.
astrology was like
Yeah.
5,000 BC.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So Hellenistic astrology. Most of actual medical astrology, though, comes from the medieval period, where it was practiced a lot, where there's a lot of techniques, there's a lot of document. It was actually, which kind of brings me to my next slide, which I can just jump to, is that it was one of the first forms of medicine because it was the safest. They would look at when someone would fall ill, and they'd look at the chart of that moment to look at the disease pattern and treatment and prognosis. It was the safest thing to use, and also like one of the main systems that was used across the board in culture. It was used for almost everything. So it made sense that it also was a part of health. And this was during the time where surgeries were starting to like really develop, but they are not safe practices. There's a lot of risk with that. So astrology was a really great tool, but also it shaped a lot of Western medicine. There's a lot of roots from astrology that kind of show up in places where you wouldn't expect, like the RX symbol for prescriptions is actually, when you turn it on its side, it resembles the sign of Jupiter. And prescription was, the roots of it actually come from Jupiter prescribing the hands of God. And so that's where like prescription comes from. Today, that's not what it means. It could mean that. Not what we're most familiar with. Yeah, I'll skip to the next one. So this kind of comes back to how they used it. And the decumbrature chart was when someone would fall ill. We don't fall actually when we turn ill anymore. So this form of, using decumbrature charts, it's still used. Not always in the same way. Decumbrature charts can also be used when someone's diagnosed with something, or so say someone has an appointment and they get a cancer diagnosis, it'd be at that moment of the diagnosis. Or you could look at the times that labs were drawn, or when symptoms first started, or there's many ways that you can look at the start of something. But decumbrature charts are also a part of a form of school of astrology called horary astrology, which is all about asking questions. And in that form of astrology, it's at the moment that you ask the question is that chart. Not, yes, when you verbalize it, when you ask it, that's the chart of that moment. So that's where decumbrature chart, it kind of now gets lumped into horary, but that was the main form of medical astrology in medieval times.
So it really had to do with the moment.
Literally fell ill. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And now we're so disconnected with our bodies that we actually don't know when illness usually begins, because illness begins with, straying away from your border of health. We tend to fall into the chronic state where we start to notice illness. Not all the cases, but just our cultural norm these days. Another way to use medical astrology is looking at the natal chart, and that looks at the temperament, the kind of predisposition factors. You can look at it preventatively, you can look at it for chronic illness, and also using a natal chart, you can then see when planets transit or go over a natal placement that can explain or correlate with new acute or chronic illnesses appearing. Yeah. No, it's just options. Totally. Yeah. This is just how it was traditionally done. And since then, there's been other forms. It's like the medical astrologers that I, learned from at the conference, they all use different styles. And it depends upon the patient, the circumstance, some, and then they even use different house systems based upon either how they've learned or the situation. So these are just examples. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. 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 I like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of also comes back to like the transits as well, is comparing, where the natal chart is versus then how like time is moving and how that's impacting a native. I'll probably use the word native a lot to talk about like a person that's their chart. It's the easiest word to use. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's Yeah, there's many techniques, which is helpful, and it's also master of none. um, my opinion. Mm.
How do you think that idea of like the Roman Catholic
Mm.
interacts with like the Eastern concept that disease
Mm.
exists prior to
Right.
the manifestation of Eastern?
Mm.
Sorry, looking
Yeah.
at the surface. And then,
Yeah. That's why as I'm like kind of sorting through how I want to use this, that's why I'm leaning more and more towards looking at a natal chart, is looking at what someone's like born with, or their jing, or their fate, and then seeing how things move through time. Um, that's where I'm falling more into versus but also later on I show an example of a decumbrature chart of someone that I know. Um, and it's just as equally fascinating, if not more shocking. Um, yeah, so I think that's where it's like helpful to keep it flexible of like per circumstance. And also you can use a decumbrature chart and compare it to a natal chart. It's all so it's never it doesn't have to be one without the other.
this follow-up question might be getting ahead a little bit, but could you use a decumbrature chart not so much from the moment they fall ill, but also for a specific point?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. And that's where kind of the concept of a decumbrature chart, it falls within horary astrology, because horary is like the moment you ask a question or a moment in a process. So like a lot of times, people who are horary astrologers, clients will come to them like throughout a process and ask a question or check in and see how the process is going. So you know, anything that you do or any plan that you have, there's always a certain random spark or change that you weren't predicting, and it goes a different way. And then at that moment when a random thing happens, things change. So it's that's what's helpful about astrology, is that planets move. So with that, it has a lot of movement and dynamic, and so can your opinion of it, so can your insight of a situation or an illness or health. It's always moving. Yes.
I was thinking about this, progression of an illness that's happening under the surface before it manifests.
Yeah.
Was there a difference in the system, as far as you can tell, between disease and injury? So I'm thinking like something like traumatic injuries and
Totally.
accidents, some could be perfectly healthy, the disease is
Yep.
and then would they still use the system? Then I could see the why can I like look at a word and not remember it? The chart that starts with D.
Decumbrature?
Decumbrature.
Yeah.
Denature.
That's one way. Denaturing ourselves. Yeah. All I want to say is Mars. Because Mars is all about like accidents and tragedy and like conflict and war and like so yes. Yes. Yeah, so that's just nods back to the unexpected. Things can happen unexpectedly, and have no idea that that was going to happen based on looking at someone's natal chart. Like, so there's an element of mystery and sudden, always.
So people have a propensity for cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely can. Looking at Mars or looking at Aries placements, definitely, because Aries is like the child. It fumbles a lot. It doesn't know its body. It doesn't know space and time. Like, but it has that fire energy. It has that curiosity. So if that Aries, one of my favorite ways of using astrology is actually the house systems. and looking at where the zodiac falls in people's houses, I think, to me, is sometimes even more important than planets. That's a whole other conversation, but yeah. So I'd say Aries or Mars, and having transits, or even looking at like progress charts. There's a theory or technique in astrology of each planet moving a certain amount each year of your life, and so then each year you can have like a progressed chart, and those planets then can move into different signs, into different houses in your chart. And so that's kind of when, like, the example of, like, at a certain point in someone's life, then they're prone to accidents or car accidents or X, Y, and Z, is that kind of progression of a planet into a sign or into a house, if that makes sense.
So understandably, it's more predestined outcome and not necessarily related.
Mm-hmm.
This event happens and then
Right.
it's already been predetermined at the time.
Could be. I don't know. Could be invited but in terms of astrology, that's how I would look at it, is looking at those placements and then looking at a progression. And this is one of my favorite questions is that I'm currently studying, is how can we use astrology in medicine? And also, I mean, this is towards like the very end of the presentation, but the ethics of using it in medicine or in astrology. Just to like get it off my chest, one of my biggest disagreements with medical astrology and it being taught in conference settings is that you don't have to have a medical license to use this. And I think that can be very dangerous, because with the training to get a license, you learn a lot about the power dynamic of giving someone advice, giving them medical advice. Even, some people, use astrology physically. They use it therapeutically with hands and touch, and to not have all of that training of that role, or even the boundaries of that role, and the ethics around giving someone an opinion that actually, if you have astrology in your back pocket, you think you're well informed, but you're no more informed than anyone else, really. You're just up here like pretending. And so that was the thing that I asked two of the medical astrologers there, is like, so how do you feel that you're teaching this to people who don't have a license? And they said, I put a slide in my PowerPoint that says don't give medical advice. I go, oh, that makes you feel better, because it doesn't make me feel better. Like, it's so easy to see doom in astrology, and then to have someone who's coming to you and like they really open themselves up and they're really looking for something, and to have a very uneducated and like, oh, that could be cancer, that could be death. Whew. And that person is vulnerable and is open and could believe you even if you don't even know what you're saying.
People really do that.
Yeah. Even if they don't know medical astrology, there's plenty of astrologers who give advice that is harmful. There's plenty of advice that anyone gives that's harmful. But one of my biggest beefs with astrology is there's no regulation around how it's used, who uses it, which is positive and negative. I think one of the big negatives is harm, but maybe that's just my point of view. But the way that I think it can be really helpful and really be therapeutic is it's a tool to ask more questions. It's a tool for a practitioner to be more curious and to think beyond, when someone comes in with a headache or constipation, you already start going down a list of what it could be, and you narrow them into this place, and you say, oh, well, obviously it's your diet. Like, and this can help you ask more questions, not determine, ask more questions of like, I'm curious if you have this placement, maybe there's some emotional component to this, maybe, and get really, really, really specific about what that nature could be, and to lean in and ask more questions. And I think it also helps build the relationship between patient and practitioner, and which is vital to any practitioner or health provider. Therapeutic is the relationship and the trust and the vulnerability and the someone feeling seen and feeling really cared for. I think astrology can help in that way, is to name some things that maybe someone has been trying to find the words to name, and to have some acceptance around or awareness of, or even just yeah, I do really like that. People feel a little bit of validation, and then that builds trust, and it builds a leaning in and a wanting to really receive something when they feel seen. So that's my equal-sided positive as my very low negative. Of course.
I feel like it's part of this broader idea of the democratization of knowledge, and specifically medical.
Totally.
In the clinic, you often will have patients who have self-diagnosed themselves using WebMD.
Right.
And just kind of the dangers of that, because people can get really locked onto specific ideas of what's happening. And I think democratization of knowledge is a good thing.
Right.
And democratization of practices are a good thing.
Right.
But then you always have to, there's always the issue of people are going to not study it.
Right.
People are not going to take the time
Right.
to actually understand what's going on, and instead just latch on to very simple concepts that fit. So I think that's, so I come from a Reiki background, also, where I think there are also a lot of issues with this, where people are giving medical or even more so therapeutic, emotional advice that can sometimes be harmful.
Yeah.
You gotta really walk a fine line of understanding where your place is, and that people can be very impressionable.
Yeah. I think especially in our culture and in this moment in time, I think the communal aspect of knowledge is really diminished, and that has really big costs. That could be a whole no, I love it. No, that's where my mind goes, of how do we use this, how do we share it, because I also very much believe in knowledge is power, but also how then do we distribute knowledge, and how do we make it inviting, but how do we also have some boundaries around it, this kind of in out direction of yin and yang.
It also seems like some people that are in the position of offering, say, actual offering, want to keep people roped in to their services,
right,
as it were, and keep them coming back as the only source of information or help to the other side,
right,
sort of be that intermediate between
gatekeeper.
And to me, it's in order to really, like you're saying, know your position, know your place, is to realize that as that intermediate, there's a responsibility to actually remove oneself from the picture, so that they can have their own understanding, their own picture, which is sort of contrary to how most people approach it. We're I need to secure my business, I need to secure my function, or my role, because I put so
Yeah.
much time and effort into this, like I should be, well, actually, it's like, for instance, when I was doing like hypnosis, it's like,
Right.
my ideal session was they would never come back again.
Right.
It's like I'm trying to put
But on a monetary wise. Yeah. Totally.
But,
Yeah.
I think there's something there.
Yeah.
Realizing that people are impressionable. They are
Mhm.
suggestible. They're looking for guidance. They're
Right.
looking for connection to something that they sense is real and sense is there, but can't for some reason
Totally.
access themselves.
Mhm.
So I think part of that responsibility is like as you're going educated and being like,
Yeah.
this is what this is. This is how
Totally.
this tool can be useful.
Yeah.
So that they can, work with it themselves.
Yeah.
As a way to effectively become less
Mhm.
and less suggestive.
Right.
If that makes sense.
100%. And this has been a big, astrology is kind of like filled this space in my life that I was not anticipating at all. And I've been doing a lot of readings, and the way that I am very like is something that I'm keeping at the core of it is I'm teaching it.
Yeah.
And I continuously am like, but you are the person who gets to like use this, and you get to determine like, so and which, some astrologers like disagree with. They think that teaching is too confusing, but I also think that then you're not a good teacher. or maybe it is confusing, but that's what, right.
Or, some people they just want to go eat a meal. They don't want to be
Right.
taught.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah. And but it also like all of this also reminds me of the ego of the astrologer is like to feel like especially because I've been doing like paid readings, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I notice afterwards, like the ones that I feel better about are the ones where I felt like I connected and they were like, oh yes. And like, so the drive to feel like you gave something of value to like give an impression is scary. And it's validating, but it can quickly turn into something else and turn into like oh well, I have to give them something, like I have to give them some profound message, like no. So that's why I try to keep to always teaching people what the planets are, teaching them about their house placements, teaching them about where things are, and then they can make their own interpretations. And
Yeah, and it seems like part, it could be useful as part of the intake.
Mhm.
Maybe like,
Totally.
What are your aims and your goals? What are you hoping
Right.
to get out of this, and how would you know you had a successful session?
Yep. Yeah,
And
asking
then
them.
you really can't test that.
Yeah.
For instance, not waste time trying to educate somebody that really has no interest.
Right.
They just need someone to knock them in the right direction.
Right. Yeah. It's a interesting world to be dabbling in. Okay, so now we're ready to teach. Now that I've warmed you up to the fact that I'll be teaching you about astrology today. What a good segue. Yeah, because it's fun. It's fun to learn things. I'm a student forever. I've been in school since kindergarten, and I don't think I'm ever gonna leave. My time at NUNM just keeps getting longer for some reason instead of shorter. And I'm like, maybe I'm just never gonna leave academia. I really hope so, but I don't know. Maybe I'll just accept it. I don't know. Hard to know. Hard to know. Okay. So the first thing I'm gonna start with is my favorite, the houses. And one of the easiest things to do when looking at astrology, if you don't know anything, is to start with the houses of illness. With the caveat that all houses can have illness. These are just the ones that are most typical, because of their placement in the chart and their relationship to the ascendant. So the ascendant is in the first house, it's the rising sign. And if you were to physically stand in your chart, that's where you would be, where your physical body would be, where your point of view, your eyes, how you look out into the world, how you strategize, like you'd stand right where your ascendant is. And everywhere that the ascendant can have a good view of gets kind of the light or the line of sight or awareness more typically than the houses that are in awkward spots to see. So I think about it as if you're in your car and you have blind spots, one is right next to you. You can't see where your seatbelt is. That's the 12th house, but it's right there and it's close to you. It's hugging you. It's very much like, it's a part of where you're sitting is the 12th house. And then in the panel between your main view and your window is the 8th house. So it's like that. If someone were to be in that line of sight and you don't see them, that could be the most deadly. Could be. Another place where you don't see. And then the other one would be the panel on the other side of the big, what is that called? Your window? Windshield, dashboard. Great. The one between the dashboard and your passenger side window is the 6th house, is that other blind spot. One way to look at it. So it's these places where you can't necessarily see, you need some extra tools to see it. Those usually tend to be the houses of illness because we can't see them. So they tend to lurk and overgrow and fester and create issues. Yes.
Just a question popped in my head. Why do you think the second house isn't?
I just asked Bill this the other day. He said the 6th and the 12th being cadent houses are the worst ones. The 8th because of its angular relationship, but it's still a succedent house. And the 2nd is succedent, but what did he say? That it's like the worst of the good houses and it's the best of the bad. So it's kind of this neutral house. And if you think about the 2nd house in general, it's a house of money and resources. It's like, could be good one day, bad another. It could be good part of your life, so it's kind of this mix.
Traditionally.
Right. Exactly. So it is a bad house, but it's the least bad of the bad. Is the and all of these things come down to like geometry and.
So do they talk about it that way in Hellenistic astrology?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it almost makes me wonder if it's a modern spin to sort of not talk about money sessions as being.
I mean, it's also a cultural thing too. It's even it being the 2nd house and it being so close to us, like it's a resource that we need, but it's also like a lot of people are unaware of their relationship to money, or they're aware of it and they highly avoid talking about it or working with it. It's a sensitive spot, I think just as much as the 12th, but the 12th just has more cadence, versus succedent. It's a little bit more approachable depending upon your nature. So there's 3 types of houses. The 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th are the angular houses. So it's like if you had a compass, those would be like your really steady, like north, south, east, west. So they're the most important houses, and then succeed that. So it's the 2nd, the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th houses. And then the cadent houses are the 3rd. So it's like, do you have a better way of describing succeedent and cadent?
Well, okay, the way that I sort of think about it is the 1, 4, 7, and 10, like she was explaining about the compass points, like those are considered angular. So I always envision those as like a stone that's been pushed into its like position. But like the pushing of the stone into
Right.
the vertical is the succeeded
Yeah.
house, and then the stone falling over
Mm-hmm.
the cadent, which means falling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then it has to get pushed up again in the next. So succeeding houses always follow cadent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's just sort of like
Yeah.
rising and falling of the
Yeah.
stone.
Totally. I like that. Yeah. So it's just based on where they are in the circle. Yeah. And then they make 4 divisions based on that. And
So then you can see how
2
the house
halves
can
and
be self-undoing.
Yeah.
The first house, the
totally.
the stone's been put into position in the first house, then it falls.
Yeah.
In-
Totally. Yeah. I like that.
And then your friends help pick it back.
Yeah. in the reverse. Yeah. You can go through them all. Yeah. But again, so each house can have illness based upon many factors. These are just the ones that are most typical. So it's easy to look to these houses and, just looking at someone's chart, be like, okay, I'm going to look at the 6th and the 12th, and I'm going to see what's going on. I'm going to see if there's a lot of planets there, if there's no planets there, which planets they are, if they're in a good sign. You can go on forever. But that's just a good place to start. But with the topic of houses, the most easy to see is the first house in someone's physical health, because the ascendant represents the physical body. And Bill disagrees with this comparison, and I also do, but it also fits in this example. One of the new age techniques is comparing, Aries to the first house, or Taurus to the second, and then all the way to Pisces and the 12th. With that, if we entertain this idea, and Mars represents the first house, Mars rules the adrenals. And when we get stressed, our adrenals are activated. And when people are under too much stress or their cortisol is too high, that's when they get illness. And that's where you get your most typical, your most routine illness to you, of when you're too stressed, when you're too tired, when you've overdone it. I get a sore throat, but someone else might get, their knees might swell up, or their back might hurt, or they might get headaches. That's all looking at the first house, like when someone is under stress, what shows up. And those are typically the things that people want the most treatment over, what they're going to see first before they see all these other patterns. So the first house representing, and the rising sign also represents our point of view, the way we look out into the world, the way that we strategize, the way that we, interpret things first. It's our first instinct. It's our rose-colored glasses. This is what is the easiest place to start with anyone, is where you're at right now. Not looking at your whole life and all the dynamics, where are you at right now? Is looking at the first house. So even if you just wanted to look at someone's rising sign and look at the nature of that sign, see how it might be showing up in their temperament and their physical body and their emotional body, there's a plethora there to work with. So with that, the direction that I'm going to go is we're going to go through each of the zodiac signs as groups of elements and see what they're associated with. And then after that, look at their planet that rules that sign. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to tie these two things together, because this is the technique to use in really all Hellenistic astrology, is start with the ascendant and see where the ruler is. That's so I'm trying to instill this back and forth instead of just sign and just planet. Yeah. So it might be a lot, but we're going to do it.
To clarify, this is the sign specifically in relation to the descendant?
This is the sign in general. So we can look at each of the signs and then based on someone's rising sign, then you have that in there. Cool. The other things that you can, before we jump into that, the things that you can do with the rising sign is, of course, look at the ruling planet. You can see where it is in the chart, if it's in a good place. They all have good places. They all have bad places. They can be in good or positive relationships to other planets, which can either help them or deteriorate them. And then you can also look at what other planets are actually in the first house. So those will also show up in the rising sign and contribute to that physical nature, that point of view. Those are also just as important as the ruler of that sign. And yeah, and then just looking at the common associations with that sign. So for me, for being a Virgo rising, you know, it's associated with the small intestine. So a lot of Virgo risings may have a lot of food sensitivities or IBS. You know, those are typical manifestations that could occur. Versus like Aries rising could have easy burnout or easy adrenal fatigue, but they don't notice it, or a lot of accidents. You know, these are just some of the associations that we'll get into. So we'll start with fire. I thought this was a cool way to approach all of them, is to kind of compare the different fire signs together and what their relationships and what they correlate with in the body. And these are Western associations, not Chinese associations with organs. Just to preface, that will be my like next generation of correlation. Yeah.
Western medical astrology to
Right.
Chinese like organ system.
Yeah. I have a very base understanding through Heiner and his cosmology system, and with the, you know, the 12 clock, matching that up with, I've done the matching the 12 clock up with the 12 houses. It's just planets and zodiac signs that are, because their time scales are different, so it gets tricky. But that's my next project. Yeah, it's cool, and it's also very anti to how I learn systems, is to just learn systems all on their own and try not to correlate them. That's how I very much have approached Chinese medicine, is just like keep it separate so that I can fully digest it and appreciate it, instead of always trying to just compare it to something else. So it's this battle in my head of like, I want to, but I don't want to. so it's a slow process, which I think is better.
It's kind of hard to imagine that there isn't already a complete system of medical astrology in Chinese medicine.
I'm sure there's a few, you know, because that's the thing about astrology. It's all about like school and technique, and you know, so I'm sure there is, if I believe it.
Either chapter 64, goes through, it's 81 chapters in all. You go through 60 chapters where it's just talks about medicine, and so
Yeah.
it's an astrology book.
Right.
And it's correlating the Chinese cosmology to what they're talking about.
Totally. Yeah, and like Batsa. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've entertained the idea of learning Batsa, but I know it's a much even more complicated system than Western astrology, that I'm like, maybe I'll start here, and then I'll like jump over and just learn Batsa, and then maybe try to mix the two. I don't know. I don't know. But here I am right now, just with the firesides, which is also so fitting to be thinking about, because you know, fire is the mixture of all the elements together. Yeah. Which also shows up in a lot of the a lot of the like correlations with fire are those things exactly. Is the mixture of different elements with spirit, with action, vitality, metabolism, our confidence, the impulses we have, our physical movement, perspiration, our digestive fire, how we, how fast does our metabolism move, our body heat, our body temperatures. And this is also a good point to plug that I'll be talking about a lot of these things as yin yang pairs, which can correlate to masculine and feminine as an energetic direction and quality, not gender.
Love to hear.
Can I add to that?
Please.
Non-binary. I like to use creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
talking about
Totally.
aspects of yin and yang, which are
Mhm.
relational and
Right.
aren't things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've been also trying to think of like I've been thinking just basically of like yang being out and yin being in, and how that shows up in all of these things is just in and out. Which like also actually looking at like genitalia, they're also in and out. Like I'm like, I think that's a really basic way of talking about like the energetic of it, not the identity part of it. So which is a big area of conflict and conversation in the astrological world, because I didn't know this till I went to the conference, that all of the planets and all the signs have genders. And I didn't know that. And so I was like, and so when I heard this whole conversation of like, should we get rid of this? I was like, oh, I didn't even know it was a part of it. But so to me, that means you don't need it. But right, exactly. Well, and I think that's honestly all that it truly is trying to mention is the element and the direction, the polarity, the essence of two things in comparison to each other, not gender. So that's where I'm like, I don't see why everyone just assumes that. Anyways,
We could write a book on
we can, yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
There's plenty of books already. They're
Yeah,
all placed.
there are.
Very important to remember. Always like
Mhm.
can't turn the yin
Right,
to the yang. Now it's yang
right,
to the yin,
right.
and like
It changes.
everything changes.
Yeah.
So things can begin with a yang, and
Yeah,
nothing is.
totally. Yes. Love it. So with fire, we have 3 fire signs: Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Yeah, we got a Sag rising over there with 5 placements in Sagittarius, so we can learn lots from Casey. Hmm?
Are they called quadruplets?
The elements are quadruplicity, but then within the elements are triplicities, because there's four elements. Each element has 3.
Right. So I've
So
always been
the-
confused on this. So it's like
yeah.
we're looking at the 3 fire signs.
Yes,
but
which is
they're
a
called the
triplicity.
quadruplets because it's the elements, right? And then
That seems to make sense. One of the 4.
But then what's triplicity?
the
and then the triplicities are fixed.
the tar-
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And this is the mixture of them, I guess. I don't know. 3, 4. You're the numbers guy. Yeah.
But for every element like fire, there is a
Totally.
fixed.
Yes. Which I thought this was a cool way to talk about each of the associations, is to compare them to one another and see how they kind of have this, cardinal, fixed, mutable sign element, but also all fire. Yes.
I've heard cardinal fixed mutable be explained in a lot of different ways,
Mhm.
and yeah, how do you think about it in
Mhm.
context to all of this?
Mhm. Yeah. I honestly think about it, this is where Chinese medicine does mix over. Um, in an undefinable way. So let's see how it goes. I think cardinal very much is like that woody nature. I think of it, if you look at the Oregon clock and you think about the human cycle with lung, large intestine, stomach, spleen, I think that is very much cardinal energy of like this. How do you start a process? Like, what do you need? Like, it's this very like outward direction, whereas fixed is like it's all here. So we think about like the heart, the small intestine, the bladder, and the kidney is very much of like, we're here. It's all here. Like, what do we do with it? It's in abundance. Whereas then the pericardium, the triple warmer, the liver, the gallbladder are very much like, and how do we move on? How do we transition from in and out? How do we move it along? How do we use it? What do we do with it? Kind of sometimes has no shape or form, sometimes has very specific form. So that's kind of where that gets mixed with this is, mutable is very much about like duality, how to go from one state to the other. Cardinal is about like plunging forward into a state, and then fix is kind of being like in the state and nowhere else, that that's a that's a whole yeah. Those yeah.
Just keep on taking you down.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. No, I love it. That's exactly what I wanted this to be. So yeah, it's interesting to think about, Aries is ruled by Mars, and Mars is very much about putting yourself out there, being assertive or aggressive, or, like it's this kind of woody energy. It pushes through things quite literally, fatally. It is also, associated with conflict and war and battle, but accidents, kind of this like chaos. I'd say very directed. It's a little bit more deliberate. I'd put chaos more into the outer planets, but it's very harsh. It's very abrasive, and it's a natural energy. It can take many shapes and forms. That's why we have the scale of like assertiveness to aggressive. That can look very different depending upon the day, the nature, the context, the person, their tools, how they use it. Mars, but Mars in that energy is needed. It's needed to do things. So that into the body is associated with the head, the brain, the adrenals, the how we regulate our metabolism is the role of the adrenals. And with that, the kind of archetypal correlation with Aries is that childlike energy. It's the first in the system. It's the baby. It fumbles around, it makes mistakes, but it's so curious and it wants to put everything in its mouth, like doesn't really care about the consequences. So, and with that, it can easily be overstimulated. I mean, can you imagine putting everything in your mouth? Like how quickly you'd get overstimulated, like of taste and textures and germs. It very easy to do. So an Aries rising may show up with really common headaches. Really complain of like, oh, I just can't focus. Like what has kind of that like ADHD kind of quality, ruled by Mars, running in with the adrenals, not really having, fire doesn't have a shape and it's hard to contain it because it'll burn the walls down. Which brings us into Leo, which is ruled by the sun, the biggest fireball of them all. And it's associated with the heart, the biggest source of fire in our body that is consolidated with that fixed nature. This one I still haven't figured out in my brain why, other than I see it in Bill having so much Leo placement. It's associated with the spine, and it's associated with like the bones of the spine. I wouldn't think Leo. I would think something more like Saturnian, hard. I mean, it is fixed. It is the central kind of core of our being. Yeah.
I think about the associations with Leo when you say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like looking at what you wrote down there, proud, confident. Like
Yeah.
I can see that very
Like standing up
associated
straight.
with the strong and like the pride of a lion.
Yeah.
Strong background of the warrior, of the charismatic, like
Mhm.
you don't see, you don't think of Leo
Yeah.
shrinking.
Yeah.
You see them and, like,
Yeah.
Anyway, that was just
No, that's great.
something you were talking
Thank you.
about.
That's why I'm like, help me, help me. Why does this make sense? Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. 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 I like
It
this.
kind of holds everything together.
Yeah. 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 Ooh.
Yeah.
Things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
It also represents, I specified arterial blood circulation because on the flip side, Aquarius is also associated with blood circulation. And I had to kind of dissect that down, and to then get into the specific that Aquarius, being opposite of Leo, is the return of blood, so the deoxygenated blood, and is, it's associated with the lower part of the leg. So it's all about like, how do we get that up to the top, and has a lot of like varicose veins association. So that yin yang pair of Leo representing the arterial blood, it's oxygenated, it's full of life, it's going out to the body, it's radiating. Very Leo energy. Yeah, proud, confident, can also be very prone to heartache, and very much like, takes things personally because their heart is their main receptor. Especially for Leo risings or strong Leo placements that have, are, yeah. We don't need to say more about Leo. Leo wants that, but we're not going to do it today. And then we get into Sagittarius, which one of my favorites. But I love mutability. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, which is one of the most notable things about Sagittarius. Is it's all about, Jupiter is about abundance. It's about bringing in more life, bringing in more adventure, having, lots of things around. I got to go to a really, really, really cool lecture at the conference by this very queer astrologer who's also a psychotherapist, but is like, borderline manic, but just super expressive and just so fun to talk to and listen to. And he's so alive. And he talked about Jupiter because Jupiter has been going through this transit through Pisces and Aries, and then we'll go back to Pisces and then come back to Aries. And so he talked about like Jupiter just for a full hour and a half, and talked about Jupiter as the god. He talks a lot about the mythology of the planets and signs. And he talked about Jupiter being the most polymorphous god, where Jupiter would switch from one gender to the next, to an animal, to an insect, to a cloud, like the most polymorphous of all of the gods in the zodiac system, although all of them are polymorphous. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, it was really cool. He very much talked about like Jupiter being the individual, like polymorphous version of all of us, or the queer version, or the flexible, exciting, expressive, which I just had to invite that in because I was like, it was a moment for me because I have Jupiter in Scorpio in my 3rd house. So I'm like, what's going on there? And then I was like, oh, I know what's going on there. After that conversation, I was like, I know what that is. And with that, you know, Sagittarius is associated with the thighs, the hips, the sacrum, you know, very much not the pelvis. That's Scorpio, the like reproductive parts, but like the structure that actually moves us, you know. And if you think about the sacrum, it's so movable, but it also can be extremely fixed, extremely painful when it's in a place of impingement. And that's also back to Sagittarius. Hates to be in the corral. It hates to be in, you know, locked up. It hates, it's, you know, can be very rebellious and very have trouble with, you know, authority, or, you know, I have a friend with, and I'm not talking about Casey. I'm not talking about Casey. Well, you can make that for your own, but I have a friend at NUNM who she's a Sagittarius, and some of the things I'm just like, girl, get it. Like,
No.
this thing is just like, just get over it and just do the assignment. Like, it doesn't matter who told you to do it or when it's due. Just fucking do it. Like, it's only gonna hurt you. Like, come on. That's which also points to even the Chinese liver is like associated with it. It is so creative. It is so important. It's so connected to the blood, even in, you know, what else do you call other medicine? Other medicine? Allopathic. There's the word. You know, so it's all about like processing, but generating new. You can cut the liver in half and still it'll grow into a new one. It's the general, yeah.
This is kind of a question, but I've always, with like the Sag energy of being rebellious with authority, I always get a sense of it's because they're the authority. Like Jupiter is the authority, so why would anyone give thoughts to that?
I modify that statement in my head, like, no one else is the authority over your sexual person, rather than having authority over others. I think that's
authority of self. Yeah.
Yeah, like as Aries being the general of things. Yeah, I think, and like being the highest god of them all, Jupiter, whatever.
Or even,
it's just like,
or even thinking about, you know, the liver and the 12 official roles, like the general has a lot of power, but it still has, there's still rank above it. Yeah. There's still the prime minister. There's still the emperor, you know? Yeah. So it's like, it has a lot of authority. And also to look at just Western astrology, yes, it's Jupiter, but it's still mutable. It's not cardinal. So it actually doesn't have the like initiated, like the full power. It has like this power, but then there's always like this mix and shape, and which is probably good for it, you know, to not have too much power. Yeah. But so they all have to do with like movement and metabolism, but in their own way, which will come now into their rulership. So, you know, we talked about this quite a bit. Aries with Mars. Mars is the initiating, the kind of abrasive energy. It can correlate with accidents, catastrophe. It can, you know, someone gets hit by a car. That's kind of coming back to your question, Sophie, of like, but what if something happens and it actually wasn't predetermined? It was just accident. That is very much Mars. Which it represents a lot of the yang nature of the body. This kind of, you know, we can be super yang expressive, but then, oh shit, where'd it go? Like, you know, yang rising creates headaches, which comes back to Aries relating to the head, rules the adrenals, the adrenaline, testosterone, like muscles, the red blood cells, how it fills up, things with oxygen in order to kind of push, in order to move forward. It's also associated with iron absorption, of like taking that energy from the red blood cell and using it. Mars is very much about like use and push. Which also Aries, if anyone knows anyone with strong Aries, they like to push through, like literally a baby pushing through the birth canal. It's like, let me come in. Great.
Yeah.
And then Leo, back to like the arterial blood circulation. The sun represents the vitality. An easy thing to do, medicinally with astrology, is to look at the sun placement and to see the health of the sun, because the sun represents how strong someone will recover from an illness. So that can be from a natal chart, that can be from a decumbrature chart. The moment of a diagnosis can really help give you a sense of the vital force that's pushing through, the healing ability, the internal regulation. A good example is, Aquarius is opposite of Leo, so it's opposite of where where the sun's rulership is. So Aquarius nature has a lot of, and even thinking about that time of year, it's post holidays, it's the winter. That's when people typically can have a lot of like seasonal affective disorder, withdrawal from the sun, like a lack of vitamin D. That's something to look at in people with just Aquarius sun placements, is like really ensuring that they have good vitamin D supplementation, paying attention to them more during Aquarius season. The sun represents attention. The practice of astrology is combining it all together, and why there's so much variability in astrologers, positive and negative, is interpretation. Is like, you can read what Mars represents, you can read what Aries represents, you can know what the first house represents, but then how do you blend all that together? I think of it a lot of like making paint colors. Is like, have you ever like gone to go get a paint made, and they put just a blank, I don't know if it's white or translucent or neutral, and then they put in these colors, and you're like, what? Those colors are gonna come out to this teal color? Like, no way. And then it puts it in, and then it shakes it up, and then it's like, here's your color. It's like, that's what I like, using all these pieces of astrology. And then it's like, okay, you mix it up, and then like, that's human experience in life. And like, how do you contextualize that? How do you name it? Can you? And it'll always change. And like, that's the cool thing, that's the fascinating thing, and that's why I like try to prioritize like teaching, so that then people can have those concepts in their mind and make their own judgment of what that mixture is, and see how it changes through time. Because if it's just like, oh, you're an Aries rising, so you're going to get in a lot of accidents. Maybe someone never gets in an accident. Maybe someone never like injures themselves. How does that apply to them? There has to be a lot more explanation that like it could relate to them. Jupiter. It's Sagittarius, which we talked quite a lot. But also what's really interesting about Jupiter is it's represented with growth of the body. So for better and worse, it's associated with growth hormones. So that's where, Jupiter is a benefic, which means it's one of the like fairy godmother planets. Not how it's written in the classical text, but that's my interpretation. And it was one of the big questions I actually had going into the astrological conference, was like, are benefics good? I got a lot of opinions on that, and like shared opinions about it. And a lot of people who have strong Jupiter or Venus placement, or if even more, the benefics are in relationship to each other. It's like if you're a farmer and all your fruit and veggies ripen and harvest at the same time, what the hell do you do the rest of the year? So it's kind of like an all in or all out, which is not what you would think of Jupiter, maybe. So a lot of times Jupiter placements or Sagittarius placements can show a lot of like extremism or in and out or up and down. Yeah, yeah. Which, you know, comes back to the appetite, comes back to like eating patterns, comes into, you know, cancer patterns. It's most associated with type 2 diabetes. Like, none of these things sound good, but Jupiter's a benefic. I'm still not buying it. Still not buying it. But I think if we just come back to the nature of in and out, if benefic is out and up, sure. But Venus isn't up and out. It's all about like oozing and consolidating and like gushing over something. So I'm still undetermined. Anyways, we'll move on to Earth now. As easy to understand, Earth is the physical body. It's also like our endurance, our strength, our ability to store things. It's our tendons, our ligaments. It's yin in nature, so it's very consolidating. It's very, you know, it's all about just the structure. Which is interesting to think about some of these associations. Taurus is ruled by Venus, which Venus is the relational planet. It's the ooey gooey, juicy love, like very like feminine in nature with, you know, I mean, feminine as an energetic, you know, it's very like moist and it loves to like you know, so Venus is associated with like the mucous membranes. Yeah, exactly. But Venus is it's associated with the, you know, like estrogen and progesterone, like feminine hormones, but it's also associated with the thyroid, which is really interesting to think about kind of in this benefic way. Comparing it to Jupiter, is the thyroid is all about like secreting hormones that like really control or influence our metabolism. If, you know, it comes into the picture of hypo versus hyperthyroidism, and that very much can affect someone's metabolism, their weight, their physical structure, how they can incorporate, you know, earth into their body, how they eliminate it. All of that is Taurus and Venus quality. It's associated with the neck. It's associated with the five senses. That kind of nods back to Venus and sensuality and taking things in and loving things and loving the aesthetic of things, the smell, the taste. Taurus, Venus, I should say. It's physically associated with the neck, the throat, the cervical vertebrae, like this region of the body. So Aries is the top. Then we just like work our way down, all the way down to the feet, which is Pisces. So people with strong Taurus placements, especially in the first house, can actually have a lot of hyperthyroidism, trouble with weight gain, hormonal imbalances, a really slow metabolism, not necessarily fast. Which then we go to Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury, which is the fastest planet. And, you know, Virgo's association in the body is associated with the small intestine. So here we see the other sign, the other nod to Earth is the digestion. How do we break it down? How do we use it? You know, if anyone knows any strong Virgos, that's like all that they're like really is like, what do I do with this? How do I analyze it? How do I break it down? That's, and one of my favorite things that I learned that I was like, okay, maybe there's something in medical astrology is Virgo explaining the gut brain axis of Virgo representing the small intestine ruled by Mercury, which is associated with the nervous system and the brain and mental activity. Those two together now in like Western medicine, we're learning a lot about the gut brain axis and how vital it is. And also coming then back to Virgo is like Virgo is, this, I mean, Ben, you might have more mythology to kind of add into the Virgo nature of like the virgin, the kind of like ritual aspect of like devotion and sacrifice, but also this very kind of primitive role. And it's also the time of year where the sun is starting to descend, it's just before harvest, but it's like in that sweet spot of like we're almost there, kind of pointing to the mutable aspect. It's associated with the solar plexus, the autonomic nervous system, coming back to Mercury. So parasympathetic tone is really, 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 really important for a Virgo, even though they're an earth sign. Air signs need more breathing techniques. Virgo also with that improving the parasympathetic tone. And also everyone, especially with Mercury, overstimulation and anxiety and always being in a sympathetic tone, yeah. What are you talking about? Yeah. So yeah, Virgo rising or really any strong Virgo placement can be prone to worry, anxiety, bowel changes, food sensitivities, all of that kind of nature. And then moving into Capricorn, we are very abruptly interrupted by Saturn, who likes to be the mature one of the group, who likes to make everything smaller and everything compact and organized, and it likes to make things deteriorate. It's the planet of chronic. It is the long drawn out death. Where Mars is the quick and hits you hard and you're out. Which, Capricorn is like that. It's the part of the year where we straddle 2 years, and it's kind of all about this like harshness of the turning over of life. But the cardinal energy that like that's inevitable. We got to get through it. We got to push through it. A lot of this I think of the gallbladder. It's the same time of year as the gallbladder time. The gallbladder is also a feisty, strategic, mysterious, curious organ that we're still sorting out. And yeah, so Capricorn is related to the structure of the body, the skin, the bones, what goes into the grave, what deteriorates while we're there. Capricorn energy is prone to melancholy if it's not recognized for their work. It very much likes to work, but then usually is their big fall, is not realizing when too much work is too much work. Another reason why I don't think you're a Capricorn rising.
But at the same time,
but then it's in your second house.
I get caught up and then I forget it.
Yeah, so not ruled by Saturn. Saturn doesn't forget. There's a debate. Casey's birth time is written for a time that I disagree with.
I was a home birth, and
So it can be easily variable. So I'm like,
and my
no.
mom is delusional. So
Also, during giving birth, the amount of hormones that are present makes anyone delusional,
for sure,
especially around time.
love her.
Love.
Um,
So here, yes. Do you have a question?
My brain was ticking at the gallbladder and can't get out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if we think of the gallbladder channel and its channels, we have the side of the body holding everything together,
Yeah.
and also the dying line.
Yeah.
So we have both holding together vertically and horizontally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that pivot energy that's needed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is so unlike Saturn to have flexibility, but also is probably, it's the same thing as wood. Is like we see wood as like hard, but when it's alive, it's supposed to be able to bend. So it's like these two natures of what we're used to seeing it as, and then what it actually looks like in good health. Yeah, so to come back to the rulerships, Venus is the yin nature of the body, represented with the female reproductive system, organ system, and the skin. It also is, associated with the mucous membranes. It's all about like moistening things, lubricating things, everyone needs that, not just females. Female bodied born, I should say. And then Mercury ruling Virgo, it's fast, it's the communication planet, it rules the nervous system, how a message goes from point A to point B, how it gets interrupted, all the things that happen when it gets interrupted. Mercury moving so fast can show up as heat in the body. So a lot of times actually when people have like high anxiety or high overstimulation, they actually have like feverish symptoms, which you wouldn't normally put the two together as like fever and nervous system, but that's one way to put it together is Mercury. Saturn, represents the structure of the body. It has a cold and condensing nature. All of the planets have temperatures and natures. Like Mars is hot and dry. Saturn is cold and wet. Or is it dry? It might be dry.
It's not dust around it. It's not dust.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's dry.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Saturn.
I think it's cool. I think it's dry. Yeah. Anyways, we'll move on so we can get to the air signs, which is like the mental body. It's how we connect to things. It's very like collective and communal. It's all about knowledge and ideas and communication. The breath. It also is with the nervous system, more on a sense of the actual message that's getting communicated, not the mechanism of action. The mechanism of action is Mercury, which also rules a air sign, which is Gemini. And have whatever beliefs that you have about Gemini, it has its role in the system. It is, yeah, and depending upon what mask they're wearing, and they can hide behind one. And anyways, I know a lot about Gemini by personal experience. But yeah, again with Mercury, it's connected to the nervous system, our impulses. It's associated physically with the arms, how we reach out. We have two of them. It's associated with the lungs, also have two of them. How do we intake information? How do we, expel it? It's associated with the diaphragm, so like the mechanism of actually, expanding and contracting. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it also is how we connect with the world around us, which, you know, a lot of people that, or a lot of Gemini character that we witness that feels a little manipulative or edgy or like shady is Gemini not in proper like health or in its right environment or supported. Is Gemini nature is actually how we connect with one world from the next, how even from one person to the next. Gemini is prone to overstimulation, a lot like Aries. It can show up as lung disorders. Yeah, I think it's Martha. It also points to the allergy triad of how an allergy can show up in multiple different places. That's very much an air quality. And, you know, Gemini time of year is like springtime when things are like really abundant and, you know, everyone's allergies tend to flare. That's Gemini. And also, yeah, air signs are that yang nature. So it's up and out. It's very much about like spreading, which, you know, can also be very masculine. Mm.
Okay, so Virgo is the mutable Earth sign, ruled by Mercury, and then Gemini is the mutable air sign.
Yeah,
Now, aren't they right next to each
they're in a
So-
square to each other.
They're in a square to each other. Okay. Oh, it's the sun and the moon that are right next to each other, and then the signs go by Mercury. That's right. For some reason, my brain's thinking Mercury. Yeah, so sun and moon signs, and then.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, fine.
And then Libra is ruled by Venus, which might be really easy to see. Libra loves aesthetic. It loves the way things look and feel. It's also that time of year, you know, where it's like the sun is in its fall, so it's like descending really quickly. So it's all about like that like pericardium time of like, okay, the sun's down. Now what do we do? So, you know, Libra rules the circulation of hormones. With the endocrine system, it's associated with the kidneys and the urinary system of like how we actually get rid of things. You know, that kind of points back to like Libra time of year is like how things die, essentially, or start to rot and ripen. Yeah. So this is where like Libra and Scorpio get a little murky because Libra is responsible for like the hormones, whereas Scorpio is like the physical sex organs.
Interesting that Libra would be prone to imbalances.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, I guess yeah, its function is balance.
Right.
I guess it's like if it's going to have a disorder.
Yeah. And imbalances of like any system, because of that circulation piece in the endocrine system. The endocrine system impacts every system. Yeah, so like when one thing falls, all things fall. The domino effect. You know, Libra has like that it's the quickly descending sun, so it's cardinal, so it's like boom, it moves fast and
So is there
hard.
a sign that's associated?
Like actual Cancer?
Yeah.
I would say Sagittarius. And the overgrowth. I'd also say Pisces because Pisces rules the immune system, and that not, you know, and also like Cancer can quickly cause death. Which is very much Pisces nature. It's like from one life to the next. It's all about ending things, about moving on, and a lot of those, you know, a lot of cancers start just with the immune system not functioning properly. But that doesn't mean that only Sagittarius and Pisces, if you have those placements of anything, means you're going to get Cancer. This is the ethics and the caveat that, like, no, it's not. That's where my mind goes. But also, I have a really interesting chart to use, and it is associated with Cancer. Cancer as a disease, not a sign. And then Aquarius is my hardest one. I think it's just that fixed airness is just a dense ass cloud that Aquarius is very misunderstood and hard to understand. And it's ruled by Saturn traditionally, not Uranus, which also was very hard to get associations with Aquarius because they were all Uranian. So I had to do like a lot of digging. It's associated with the ankles and the lower legs, and then that Venus blood circulation, like I said before, opposite of Leo, which is the arterial. So it's, you know, prone to varicose veins, which is the lower legs. And ties in, you know, the venous blood circulation and those actual vessels not like working properly, like you actually can't eliminate blood correctly. Yeah, but I'm not convinced. But maybe that's just Aquarius. It's very, I don't like the Uranian associations because still doesn't feel right. I mean, because even like the revolutionary aspect of Aquarius comes even with the traditional sense of it's opposite of the sun's home. So it's rebelling against the largest authority. Like, so no, I'm not sold on Uranus, but I'm also not sold on any of the outer planets having rulership because that's not what the system was built upon. But I think the outer planets have a massive role in this now world we live in and how we're impacted, which there's a Mars and Uranus conjunction on the North Node, like approaching right now. So I'm just going to rebel against Uranus. And then here we are again with the rulership. So Mercury, you know, now we're getting back into the repetitiveness of rulerships and why we can move a little bit faster. So we know Mercury is all about connection, the communication, the nervous system. That with Gemini. Venus represents the yin nature of the body, the thyroid, the moistness. I'm just conditioning you to enjoy the word. I used to. I grew out of it, so can others.
Very positive.
Yeah.
It's not like it's just the way the tongue and the mouth walk around the vowels.
Okay.
The word itself describes what it is.
Yeah, that's why I like it. Anyway, Venus ruled Libra. My moon's in Libra. And then Saturn, you know, represents the structure of the body. It has a cold and condensing nature. With that Aquarius, that just doesn't make sense. And we're just going to move on from it. Water. So water is the yin emotional body. It's the lymphatic system. It's the reproductive system. You know, a little nod to Chinese medicine of like the Jing being in the reproductive system. It's, you know, the most yin essence that we can get. It's all about fluid regulation. It's also, you know, represented in like intuition and emotional intelligence. So we look at Cancer being the cardinal water sign. It's ruled by the moon. Strong waters. Strong emotional waters. What's interesting is that Cancer is associated with the hollow organs and the intake organs. One of the intake organs being the stomach. So how do we take life in and because the stomach actually doesn't break up much. It has some like chemical factors that start to, but it's all about just how do you hold it. And like literally like that feeling when you drink too much water and you're just like, there it is. It hasn't been incorporated yet, but how do we hold it? It's also associated with the uterus. Same concept. How do we hold life? How do you just keep it right there and it just keeps growing? I don't know. It's also associated with the pericardium, which I think more it's in Western medicine pericardium, but I think even more in like Chinese pericardium of like, what is that layer that like protects our heart, holds our heart? How do we open that? How do we close it? And how that is like so much based on like the moon and our emotions and this kind of wateriness of like, does it feel safe to? Does it feel safe to be vulnerable and open and like share your most precious? And cancer can be prone to worry and anxiety that ends up in the digestive system. So strong cancer placements that have digestive disorders looking to emotional realms and seeing how that can impact it. Coming back to the stomach association. So, it can have a lot of like reflux, a lot of GERD, a lot of indigestion. That's just with the process of taking it in. It can also be associated with eating disorders, with the moon, with the emotion, with the stomach. It also is prone to fluid retention, which is easy to understand, I guess, with water. Scorpio is ruled by Mars. Easily seen in the scorpion, that snapper, the poison. But it's also, this interesting state of fixed water of we don't let animals drink from sitting water and still water of like, will it be poisoned? What's in there? But also it's associated with the reproductive system, and is this an inevitability of this place that we have to sort through in order to have purity, in order to have creation, in order to share communally with others. Maybe not communally, that's not the right word. But so it's all about like the purification system, whether that be the reproductive system or the sex organs or the bowels, the bladder, the sweat. Yeah, it's like, what do we do with that fixed water? What do you do about that dilemma but it's this gathering of water. Sure, there might be disease in it, but like, it's a pile of water. Like when you're out in the wilderness and need water, there it is. But like, do you trust it? Feels like Scorpio.
You just need to carry a light straw.
Yeah, exactly. You have to have a filter. The purification system. Ta-da!
I've got a hummingbird.
Oh, I was like, you've never seen a hummingbird before? Whoa.
It was
I
just
know,
like, it was suspended in the air. It was just like zipping around backwards.
Yeah, that's what they do. Aww.
Yeah. How cool is that?
Aww. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah.
All right.
That has its thing.
I know the hummingbird took the stage, but we gotta get through.
Okay.
So Pisces, we've made it to our last sign. The most interesting of, not the most interesting. I won't play favorites. They think they are. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that's why the word dropped in. A mutable sign, easy to witness that. Ruled by Jupiter, so it's like very much like Jupiter in the traditional sense. Neptune also, I believe in Neptune with Pisces, not by rulership, but just the nature of it. Very dreamy, very, spiritual from one realm to the next. There's really beautiful mythology about Pisces in that way. It's associated with the immune system in the body, the lymphatic system, this kind of like mysterious, like power force that plays a hand in everything with the water, the nodding to the water. And it can cause a lot of issues that are really hard to address because, that slippery fucking fish just gets out of your hand. You just can't catch it. Very much the immune system. And it's like, once your pond is out of fish, you're out of fish. Like, same with the immune system. Once it's shot, it's shot, and you got to put one fish back in at a time and hope they like each other and hope that they breed well together, or they don't, or they overbreed it and you got a nasty ass pond. Coming back to Scorpio. No, it's just water. Yeah, so very mysterious but extremely vital. This is where we can look to immune disorders, kind of the loss of boundaries. I'm sure almost everyone knows a Pisces that has a lot of boundary issues, who's just like, and you're like, whoa, do you have a container? Can we put it in there? Laxity of tissues. Jupiter and Venus tend to have like a lot of like laxity and softness and like, oh, I don't care. And then like Saturn and Mars like to like, ooh, let's build, let's like bulk up, let's like be strong, let's like have a lot of form. Those are their opposites. And then we're back to these, which we've been through all of them except the moon, which the moon represents the regulatory processes and the rhythms, the emotion, how, it's the yin yang pair to the sun, which the sun is the life force, but then the moon distributes it and regulates it. So it shows up in the menses, the emotional experience, the parasympathetic and sympathetic balance and tone. And it rules the intake organ. So how do we take in life? And then Mars, again, just representing that kind of like adrenal nature. And then Jupiter representing that like growth nature. So I'm not going to go through these because we've severely run out of time, but I can also share this with anyone that wants it. They just go through the planets like more in detail, but all in yin yang comparison. So the sun and the moon, how they're yin yang.
Let's do it.
Venus and Mars, how they're yin yang. Jupiter and Saturn, how they're yin yang. And then Mercury all on its own because it's the best planet. And there's like, it's, I feel like Mercury is the most central planet to all these kinds of like themes and studies in this group of Mercury is the communication planet, but it's also like the bearer of knowledge. It, you have to have, enough Mercury to like have initiative, to like ask a question, to absorb something, to want to digest information. And also all of these techniques of like Qigong or meditation or breath work on Mercury. It works on calming down that intake and calming down that like high speed action of obtaining things, but how to integrate them. So this is just a chart of rulership, which each planet rules a sign or two signs. And then wherever it rules, the opposite sign of that is where it's in its detriment. And so this is kind of where medical astrology, how you kind of synthesize a little bit, is looking at if it's in its rulership, then it has good in, it has what resources and environment that it needs. And then if it's in its detriment, it's in a place where it doesn't do well. It doesn't have the environment and the resources that it needs, Whereas exaltation is a place of privilege. So it's like when the Queen of England comes to America, she's still the Queen of England. We see her as queen here, a queen who's visiting here. She gets a lot of privilege, and like privilege that it's like, what? Like, okay, sure. So each planet has a place where they have that privilege, and in those places they have good reputation. So this comes across in like the esteem, someone's confidence, a little bit like extra resources that they don't even acknowledge or know is there, is in exaltation. Whereas places in fall have not bad reputation, but it just doesn't feel strong. It doesn't feel like that planet is has the reputation to like be confident or be assertive or feel like it has resource. But also, I did a whole just on these what do you do in detriment and fall, because we may not everyone has planets in detriment or fall, but it's very common. What do you do? Like, you could roll over and just feel like there's no way to change it. And also, those planets then are usually the most creative because they have to get creative with how they get their resources and how they get their esteem. And when you look at a lot of charts of people who are famous artists, they have a lot of planets in detriment and fall because they had to get creative. And also another point is that um I lost my train of thought. Maybe it's on the next slide. Oh, here it is. Yes. It's like what to do when they're in poor conditions. And, there's always more to the picture. It could be that it just becomes really creative. I have a Mercury in Pisces, and I love writing. It's the one way that I feel the most creative. And I read it and then I'm like, oh my gosh, like I wrote that? Like, that's really cool. So when I learned about astrology, I was like, oh, like, but that's the thing I've actually gotten most creative with. And I feel like I've actually given a lot of attention to. Luckily, it's in an angular house, so it gets a lot of attention. And I'm a chatty Cathy, so I just get a lot of practice. And also then you can look to if it's aspected by the planet that rules the sign it's in, it has extra resource. If it's aspected to a planet that is of good nature or has strength in it, it donates to that planet. When there's an abundance one place and it has a relationship, things can even out and be redistributed. So it's a complicated system. Me and Sophie were talking about this on the bathroom break, was that, so if you know planets associations and zodiac associations and then houses and then aspects, like how do you put all that together? And that's the practice of astrology. Is like making interpretations of like what it means. And I'll use it again because it's my favorite way of explaining it, is when you go to the paint store and you ask for a paint, you see the color on the card, and then they put, the blank paint into the thing, and then all of a sudden there's like 4 colors going in. You're like, what the fuck? No way is that gonna make that color. And then they shake it up and there's that color. That's like astrology, is you get all these colors and you have no idea how it's going to turn out. We don't know the other side what the color is other than our experience. And it can change throughout time and experience and look different, when there's a light next to it or a window or it's outside or it's on the ground, it's all in context. It'll look different. Or if you, scribble on the wall with a marker or you punch a hole through the wall, looks different. And that's the art of astrology, I should say. This is a chart of a friend of mine whose mom was just in April diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Unfortunately, she died 3 months later. I feel fortunate. This is the chart of the moment that she was diagnosed. Yeah. And I've shared this with her. I walked her through this. I walked her through her death chart, and she feels very happy that this is like a part of it. And it's a really unbelievable chart. So she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and the first thing that we do when looking at a chart is you look at the ascendant and you look at the ruler. So here the ascendant is in Cancer, which represents the mother, represents this like yin. Yes.
Does it matter if the diagnosis is
That's a good question. I don't know.
I would assume they would accept it if they're doing,
Well,
you know, right?
I'll answer that question as I work through it, and then the next chart after this, because the next chart is her death chart. And also she was originally diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but then later found out it was originally colon to liver to pancreas. So that's a good example of this was the moment in time of this moment, but then it changes and then it shows up as something different. And each then of those moments can have their own charts. So this, looking at the ruler of the ascendant, is the moon, and we see the moon in Virgo, which rules the digestive organs. And then the most notable thing of this chart is that both of the malefics, the planets that cause harm, are in the 8th house of death and loss. But so this is where the ethics of astrology and medical astrology come in, is like, so would you just straight up tell someone, like, because those planets are there, that they're gonna die? That's how someone read it. But like how uninspiring that is to a patient. And in this case, even though she has really strong aspects of loss, she also has 2 planets that are exalted, and that's Venus in Pisces, ruling the immune system, Venus being relationships, and she had a really strong immune system and a really strong support system. And then the sun is exalted in Aries, representing the vitality. So there's 2 things of equal strength that are privileged, as there are 2 planets that are too close together in a house of death and loss. So this is where it's like helpful to look at astrology, is like, yeah, so you may already know the diagnosis, and by knowing the diagnosis, you may know the prognosis, but you can look at this to see what other resources that there are. And, you know, this is also my dilemma, is like, so this could just inform the practitioner, but do you communicate that to a patient? What do you communicate? This is like where, like, if an astrologer who didn't really have the teaching of the role of a practitioner or the role of this kind of information could be really damaging.
The teachings of certain types of knowledge should be conceptual, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's
Yeah.
also the idea of scope of practice.
Totally.
Like when you're
Yeah.
acupuncturist, you
Right.
cannot diagnose
Right.
certain things.
Exactly.
There is this idea of staying.
Yeah. So what's the scope of practice of astrologers when there's no system that holds them in place? It's scary. Yeah. Yeah.
Like that.
I always appreciate, especially with astrologers, kind of like how you're handling it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Totally.
It isn't determining exactly
Right.
I don't like the idea of predetermination,
Yeah.
but this is where things are and how
Yeah.
you're positioned to it. Right now, the
Right.
set of downward skating the curve.
Yeah, totally. And what's interesting is so after she got this diagnosis, she was diagnosed in Spokane, Washington, and she had the resources to actually go to an intensive inpatient center in Mexico where it was all based upon like immune health for cancer patients. And so Venus in the ninth, the house of travel, and in the sign of the immune system, with Venus in its best position, her going there actually was one of the best things that she did it. And she, over the first 3 weeks, her tumor growth decreased by 30% in 3 weeks. And then she had a bowel impaction and had to have a surgery. And then the cascades of those surgeries pointing to Mars were just, it was, my friend said that up until the day she died, they all believed she had an equal chance of living as dying. And like that it was like this touch and go the whole way through of like, she could overcome this. Like, and she believed until like the last week of her life. And then she was like, I can't. And they're like, no, come on, you've been pushing so hard. And unfortunately, ironically, when she died, so in this first chart, we see the sun over here in the 22nd degree of Aries, right? And we see Mars over here in Aquarius at the 28th degree. Now, this chart's going to look different, but just follow. Here, back in Aries, Mars came to the 22nd degree where the sun was when she was diagnosed. So Mars comes through over top of that sun and the day of death. She died on the day that Mars came and took that last bit of vitality from the sun. Like, and in the 6th house of health. Like, and with Chiron right there and Jupiter, like, and the moon, and yeah, I could go on and on, but I think this is in situations like this where there seems like there's, her and her family were very religious and they've left their faith. They have given up because they don't understand why someone of meticulously good health her whole life dies painfully, the most painful death, suffered the whole way through. Why, like, to lose your faith? And this is like one gift that astrology, I read this to her and I was like, me seeing that Mars went over the sun, I was like, she died literally the day maybe she was supposed to. Having Chiron there and Jupiter, like, I was like, there is some, like, she's no longer suffering. There is some blessing in that, and some weird, yeah. She got at least some not explanation, but something made sense of it, and somewhat poetic. It doesn't alleviate, but just another tool that can provide some sense of system when things really don't make sense. And yeah.
In that regard, it's no different than saying, it's God's plan, or it's like a
Right.
number of other things.
Right. With their... Yeah. Right. But some seem like, what? How could this be your plan? You like, it's like so tricky.
Why we have to.
Right. Exactly. It's like when one fails, maybe try this one
It's like,
or not. And it's even crazier that it's Scorpio rising chart ruled by Mars, and Mars was.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
Well, I wonder you know, how much the surgery, played into
oh,
it,
100%.
right? Because Mars as
Yep.
the blade that cuts.
Yep. Yeah.
Being ultimately
Yeah.
responsible.
Yeah, she was, and but it's also like, yes, it could have been the surgery, but also what she would have died from if she wouldn't have had the surgery also would be very Mars, like literally her bowel exploding. That sounds pretty Mars to me. I mean, catastrophic and like, oof. Yeah.
Pluto's making a square with Mars. There.
Yeah.
Oh, is that a? Yeah, that's a
Oh, yeah, it's a square.
Saturn making a square.
I don't know. I'm kind of maybe remembering vaguely that Scorpio is also the sign of the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I just
Yeah.
so wasn't quite sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Yeah. Well, and it was even interesting to like talk to her of like her and her brother have acceptance over it, but they're trying to make sense of the information, which is very much like Neptune in the fifth. But then her dad, this Moon Uranus conjunction in Taurus, which the seventh house is committed partnership, marriage, that he's like, which also like obviously he's completely rocked. Like they were together for 30 years. They worked together. Like he was a dentist and she was the office manager. Like they were socially, they did everything together. Everything. And that he's most like, I don't have my regulation system. I don't. So shockingly to lose your partner so fast. Uranus is very sporadic and sudden, and like lightning, it'll come in and it'll scar something, but then lightning goes away, but then that damage is there forever. And the moon being like how you regulate and how you attach and how you feel. Just sobering. And the sun moved into Cancer, which is where the ascendant was in the other chart. Just this, like, I was just like, I can't make this shit up. Like, this is wild. Wild. But also, we talked about ethics a lot, but just to come back to like never assuming someone's experience, I think right now the culture of astrology in our world is very much like, oh, they're a Scorpio, so they're like this, or like, it can be very generalizing, and to like remind yourself to like come beyond that and be like, let it be a question, and that it's nothing is determined because the planets are always moving. And then this is just like, if you wanted to integrate it, the first step would be learning astrology, and the second step would be like learning the medical associations.
One, learn it. Second
is learn it. And then there's
repeat it.
Yeah. I did this presentation at NUNM for a scholarship, and it was much more condensed, which was fun but not as fun. And I was like, chart reading is unavoidable, so you have to learn how to do that. And they were like, really? I'm like, yeah, you can't get out of it, sorry. Then these are just resources of places to learn astrology, and then places where you can look at medical astrology, which I brought a lot of my books today if anyone wants to look at them.